The sharp hum of the stasis chamber jolted Ethan Carter awake. Cold metal pressed against his back, and the stale, antiseptic air scratched his throat as he sat up, coughing. Blinking against the low amber light, his gaze darted across the alien symbols flickering on translucent panels around him. The room was impossibly vast, its walls pulsating faintly, as though alive. He wasn't on Earth anymore. A mechanical voice reverberated through the chamber, smooth yet unnervingly devoid of emotion. Subject 3417, human male. Status, compatible. Await the Queen's command. What command? Ethan's voice cracked as he stumbled to his feet. His khaki cargo pants and faded green jacket, his last connection to the hike he'd been on, felt alien now, like relics from another life. Hey! Who's running this freak show? His words were met with silence, save for the steady rhythm of the wall's pulsations. Before he could take another step, a figure emerged from the shimmering archway ahead. She was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Tall and statuesque, her skin shimmered with hues of silver and lavender, like liquid moonlight. Her eyes, a haunting gold, bore into him with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. Intricate tendrils extended from her head like a crown, their faint glow casting soft light on her angular features. She exuded an aura of authority, dangerous, magnetic, and utterly captivating. Human, she said, her voice rich and commanding, layered with an undertone that seemed to echo inside his mind. You have been chosen. Ethan took a cautious step back, his heart hammering. Chosen for what? And who the hell are you? I am Queen Seraphine of the Zephyrite, she replied, each word deliberate, her gaze unyielding. You are here because your species possesses qualities critical to the survival of my kind. He stared at her, his confusion mounting. You abducted me for, what, a science experiment? She tilted her head, a flicker of something, amusement perhaps, dancing in her eyes. Not an experiment. A partnership. Ethan barked out a laugh, though it was edged with disbelief. A partnership? Lady, I don't know what you think humans are good for, but I'm not signing up for whatever this is. Send me back. Seraphine stepped closer, her movements fluid yet predatory. Your defiance is admirable. It is one of the traits we value. But you will listen, human, for the fate of my people rests upon your cooperation. The weight of her words sank in, though Ethan's instinct to resist burned just as fiercely. I didn't sign up to save the universe, he muttered. You may not have chosen this path, she said, her tone softening ever so slightly. But it chose you. The air between them grew heavy, charged with unspoken tension. Ethan couldn't decide whether to fear her or admire her. Her presence was overwhelming, not just in its alien beauty but in the sheer force of her will. Fine, he said, crossing his arms. Start talking. What do you need from me, and why should I care? Seraphine's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she gestured toward the shimmering archway. Walk with me, and you will understand. The corridor beyond the chamber was unlike anything Ethan could have imagined. The walls glowed faintly with bioluminescent patterns that shifted as they passed, casting hypnotic shadows. A faint hum, like distant whispers, resonated through the space. Our world, Seraphine began, her voice steady, was once a beacon of life and innovation. But centuries of genetic stagnation have left us on the brink of extinction. We relied too heavily on perfection, eliminating variability, and now we pay the price. Okay, but where do I fit into this? Ethan asked, his skepticism undiminished. She stopped and turned to face him, her golden eyes locking onto his. Humans are unique. Your adaptability, resilience, and capacity for emotional depth are unparalleled. These traits are precisely what we need to rebuild our gene pool and our society. Ethan's stomach turned. So what? You want me to be some kind of donor? Seraphine's lips curved into a faint smile, though it held no humor. It is more than that. A mere donor would be insufficient. What I seek is a partner, someone whose strength and spirit can challenge and complement my own. Ethan's laugh was bitter, more out of disbelief than amusement. You don't even know me. How can you be so sure I'm the right guy? I have studied your kind extensively, she said, stepping closer. But more than that, I see it in you. Your defiance, your humor in the face of fear, your refusal to submit blindly, these are qualities my people have forgotten. Qualities we need to survive. Ethan's mind raced, grappling with the absurdity of the situation. He was just a guy from Earth, an outdoorsman with a love for hiking and a knack for fixing things. How could he possibly be the answer to an alien queen's prayers? Before he could respond, the corridor shuddered violently, throwing him off balance. A low, guttural roar echoed through the space, followed by the sound of heavy, approaching footsteps. Sarathin's expression darkened, her body tensing like a predator sensing danger. They've found us. Who? Ethan asked, his heart pounding. The rebels, she said, her voice a low growl. They oppose this alliance and would rather see us perish than accept human help. The glow of the walls dimmed as the sound of the intruders grew louder. Sarathin turned to Ethan, her golden eyes blazing with intensity. If you wish to survive, human, you must trust me. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Lead the way, Your Majesty. As they sprinted down the corridor, the walls flickering with warning lights, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he just stepped into a story far bigger than himself. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to run away, or see how it ended. The soft glow of bioluminescent panels lined the emergency tunnel as Ethan sprinted behind Sarathin. Her movements were swift and calculated, each step whispering across the smooth floor. The air was thick with tension, the distant roars of the rebels echoing like thunderclaps through the labyrinth of alien architecture. Do they always announce their attacks like that? Ethan muttered, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Subtlety doesn't seem to be their strong suit. Sarathin glanced back, her golden eyes sharp with focus. They rely on fear to disorient their prey. Do not let it work on you, human. Prey? Ethan shot back, ducking under a low archway. Really boosting my confidence here, Your Majesty. Despite the urgency, Sarathin's lips twitched in the faintest hint of amusement. Your wit is wasted on the rebels, Ethan. Save your breath for survival. The tunnel widened into a cavernous room, its walls shimmering with cascading lights that resembled a starry night sky. A large, circular platform dominated the center, surrounded by intricate control panels glowing with alien glyphs. Sarathin strode to the console and pressed her hand to it. The glyphs responded instantly, shifting and pulsing under her touch. What is this place? Ethan asked, scanning the room. The air was cooler here, tinged with a metallic tang that tickled his nose. The Nexus, Sarathin replied without looking up. A central hub for controlling our defenses. If we are to survive, we must activate the perimeter shield. Ethan frowned, his gaze darting to the arched entrances around them. The faint growl of approaching rebels was growing louder. How much time do we have? Not enough, Sarathin said grimly. Her fingers danced across the console, the alien symbols glowing brighter with each command. You must hold them off while I complete the activation sequence. Hold them off? Ethan's voice rose an octave. I'm just a guy from Earth. My most dangerous combat experience involves wrestling with IKEA furniture. Sarathin straightened, her tall frame exuding authority. You are more capable than you realize. Fear is your enemy, not the rebels. Trust your instincts, Ethan. Her words hit him harder than he expected, a mixture of challenge and reassurance that left no room for argument. He swallowed hard and nodded. Fine. But if this goes sideways, I'm holding you personally responsible. Ethan positioned himself near the main entrance, gripping the only weapon he could find, a jagged piece of debris that looked vaguely like a spear. His palms were slick with sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. The dim glow of the Nexus room cast shifting shadows, making every flicker of movement feel like a threat. The first rebel appeared, stepping into the light. It was taller and bulkier than Sarathin, its features grotesque yet eerily humanoid. Its skin was a mottled gray, its eyes glowing a dull red. The creature's movements were deliberate, its clawed hands flexing as it sized Ethan up. Well, Ethan muttered, tightening his grip on the makeshift spear. "Guess we're doing this." The rebel lunged, and Ethan barely had time to sidestep. He thrust the spear forward, the jagged edge scraping against the creature's armored chest. It snarled, swiping at him with claws that came dangerously close to his face. "Could really use a tutorial here, Sarathin!" Ethan shouted, ducking under another swing. "Focus!" Sarathin's voice rang out, calm but firm. "Do not overthink. Let your instincts guide you." Instincts, Ethan thought bitterly as he dodged another attack. What instincts? He was a hiker, not a warrior. But as the rebel lunged again, something shifted. His movements became quicker, more fluid. He sidestepped, pivoted, and drove the spear upward with surprising precision. The jagged edge found a weak spot, piercing the creature's side. It let out a guttural howl before collapsing. Ethan stared at the fallen rebel, his chest heaving. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "That wasn't terrible." But there was no time to celebrate. More rebels were closing in, their guttural growls filling the air. Ethan braced himself, his adrenaline surging. He wasn't sure how long he could keep this up, but he wasn't about to let them reach Sarathin. At the console, Sarathin worked with an almost inhuman focus. The Nexus responded to her every command, but the process was slower than she anticipated. She could feel the room's vibrations intensify with each passing moment, the rebels closing in. And yet, she found her thoughts drifting to Ethan. He was unlike any human she had studied. His defiance, his humor, even his fear, all of it was raw, unfiltered, and strangely inspiring. She had chosen him for his genetic potential, but now she wondered if there was more to her choice than science. "Sarathin!" Ethan's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster!" The urgency in his tone was matched by the sound of a rebel roaring in pain. Sarathin's fingers moved faster, her golden eyes narrowing. Almost there. The final command sequence lit up the console, and a low hum filled the room. The perimeter shield began to rise, its shimmering barrier sealing off the entrances one by one. Sarathin turned to see Ethan fending off two rebels at once, his movements growing more confident, more calculated. "Ethan, fall back!" she called. He didn't need to be told twice. Dodging a clawed swipe, he sprinted toward the platform as the shield sealed the last entrance behind him. The rebels slammed against the barrier, their roars muffled as they clawed at the glowing energy field. Ethan collapsed onto the platform, gasping for breath. His makeshift spear clattered to the ground beside him. "Tell me that's it," he panted. "Please tell me we're done." "For now," Sarathin said, stepping closer. Her gaze softened as she looked at him, her voice quieter. "You fought well, Ethan." He let out a dry laugh, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I fought lucky. Let's not sugarcoat it. Luck can only take one so far," she said. "The rest is strength, and you have more of it than you realize." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the tension in the room shifted. The weight of survival lingered, but there was something else, something unspoken yet undeniable. Ethan broke the gaze first, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "So," he said, clearing his throat. "What's next? Another round of Save the Queen?" Sarathin smiled, a small but genuine expression that softened her commanding presence. "Rest, human. There will be time for answers soon enough." As Ethan leaned back against the platform, exhaustion taking over, he couldn't help but wonder, what had he gotten himself into? And why, despite the insanity of it all, did he feel a strange sense of purpose, like he was exactly where he was meant to be? The Nexus room hummed with a quiet stillness that felt oddly foreboding. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the faintly glowing energy shield that now encased the entrances. Outside, the rebels snarled and clawed at the barrier, their grotesque forms shrouded in the dim light. The shield held, but their persistence left an uneasy chill in the air. Sarathin stood nearby, her tall figure silhouetted against the bioluminescent walls. Her gaze was fixed on a holographic map projected before her, her expression unreadable. Ethan couldn't help but study her, trying to decipher the layers of her composure. She was commanding, almost imperious, yet there was something else, an underlying vulnerability she kept buried beneath her regal exterior. "So," Ethan said, breaking the silence, "what's the plan, Your Majesty? Wait them out until they get bored, or do we have a grand escape in mind?" Sarathon didn't turn, but her voice carried a quiet intensity. "The shield will hold for now, but it is a temporary measure. The rebels will adapt, as they always do. We must find a way to neutralize their leader before they breach our defenses." "And by neutralize you mean?" Her golden eyes flicked to him, and for a moment, he felt the weight of her gaze. "Eliminate," she said simply. "There is no other way to ensure our survival." Ethan leaned back on his elbows, exhaling slowly. "Great. So, assassination it is. Just another day in the life of a kidnapped human." Her brow arched faintly, but there was no amusement in her tone. "Do you object to protecting your own life?" "No," Ethan said, sitting up straighter. "But I do object to being thrown into a war I didn't sign up for." Sarathon took a step closer, her movements deliberate. "You misunderstand, Ethan. This is not just my war. The survival of my people, and your continued existence, are intertwined. If we fail here, the rebels will not stop with me. They will hunt you, for you represent everything they despise: change, adaptability, and hope." The words landed heavier than Ethan expected. He wanted to argue, to find a crack in her logic, but deep down, he knew she was right. Still, he wasn't ready to give her the satisfaction of agreement. "Fine," he said after a pause. "But if we're doing this, I'm going to need more than a pep talk and a pointy stick." Sarathon's lips curved into a faint smile, her first genuine one since they'd met. "That can be arranged." The armory was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Rows of sleek, alien weapons lined the walls, their surfaces shimmering with iridescent hues. Each one seemed to hum faintly, as if alive, and the air buzzed with an almost electric energy. Sarathon moved with practiced ease, selecting a compact device that fit snugly in her hand. "This," she said, holding it out to him, "is a plasma blade. It is compact, efficient, and lethal in close combat." Ethan took the device, turning it over in his hands. It was surprisingly lightweight, its surface cool to the touch. With a press of a button, a blade of glowing blue energy extended from its hilt, humming softly. "Cool," he muttered, giving it an experimental swing. "Do I get a user manual, or are we going with trial and error?" Sarathon stepped closer, her voice low. "Your instincts will guide you, but if you falter, remember this: hesitation can mean death." Ethan looked at her, the seriousness in her tone cutting through his usual sarcasm. "Noted." She selected a weapon for herself, a long, elegant staff with pulsing energy conduits along its length. It suited her, Ethan thought. Regal, powerful, and just a little intimidating. "So," he said as they made their way back to the Nexus, "you've clearly done this kind of thing before. Assassination missions, rebel takedowns. I'm guessing it's not your first rodeo." Sarathon's expression darkened. "It is my duty as queen to protect my people, no matter the cost. I have made choices that weigh heavily on me, but I do not regret them. Regret is a luxury we cannot afford in war." Ethan nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But what happens after this? Let's say we win, take down the rebels, save the day. What then?" She hesitated, her steps slowing. For the first time, her composure seemed to falter. "I do not know," she admitted. "For so long, my focus has been survival. I have not allowed myself to think beyond it." Her vulnerability caught him off guard. She was always so poised, so unwavering, that seeing even a glimpse of uncertainty made her feel human. "Well," Ethan said after a moment, "maybe that's something to think about. Survival's great and all, but it's not much of a life if there's nothing waiting on the other side." Sarathon looked at him, her golden eyes softening. "You speak as though you understand." "I've been through my share of storms," Ethan said, his tone lighter now. "Sometimes the hardest part isn't surviving, It's figuring out what to do once the sky's clear. A faint smile tugged at her lips, but before she could respond, the Nexus's alarms blared to life. The shield flickered, the lights dimming as the energy field began to destabilize. They're breaking through, Seraphine said, her voice sharp with urgency. We must move, now. The tunnels were a blur of glowing walls and echoing footsteps as they made their way to the surface. Seraphine led the way, her staff glowing faintly in the dim light. Ethan followed close behind, his grip tight on the plasma blade. Every sound, every shadow felt like a threat waiting to pounce. As they reached the exit, the air grew colder, tinged with the metallic scent of rain. The rebels' snarls echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. What's the plan, Your Majesty? Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. There is a transport vessel hidden nearby, Seraphine said. If we can reach it, we can gain the advantage. And if we can't? She glanced back at him, her expression fierce. Then we fight. The words hung in the air as they emerged into the open. The landscape was otherworldly, vast fields of glowing vegetation under a sky streaked with ribbons of light. But there was no time to marvel at the beauty. The rebels were closing in, their forms silhouetted against the horizon. Ethan tightened his grip on the plasma blade, his heart pounding. Guess we're about to find out if I've got those instincts you keep talking about. Seraphine's gaze met his, a spark of something unspoken passing between them. You do, she said softly. I have no doubt. The rebels charged, their roars shaking the ground beneath them. Ethan and Seraphine stood side by side, their weapons glowing in the dim light. For the first time, Ethan felt something more than fear, something that felt a lot like determination. Let's do this, he said, his voice steady. As the first rebel lunged, Ethan moved to meet it, his blades slicing through the air. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. The world exploded in chaos. The rebels' guttural roars reverberated through the air as they charged across the glowing field, their silhouettes distorted by the faint, rippling light of the alien sky. The vegetation underfoot glowed faintly, casting an eerie green hue over the battlefield. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears, his grip on the plasma blade tightening. Beside him, Seraphine stood tall, her staff blazing with vibrant energy. She was calm and composed, exuding an almost regal authority. Remember, she said, her voice steady but urgent. Focus on survival. They will test your resolve. Show them you will not falter. Ethan exhaled sharply, grounding himself as he met her gaze. Noted. Let's hope my survival instincts don't decide to take a day off. The first rebel lunged, a mass of mottled gray skin and flashing claws. Ethan ducked and twisted, the plasma blade humming as he slashed upward, catching the creature's side. It howled in pain, stumbling back before collapsing. Nice, Ethan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But the satisfaction was short-lived as two more rebels emerged, their red eyes locked on him. Okay, that's not fair. Seraphine surged forward, her staff sweeping in a graceful arc that sent one of the creatures sprawling. The energy conduits on the staff flared, releasing a pulse that knocked the second rebel off its feet. You fight well, she said, glancing at Ethan as she spun to block another attacker. But you hesitate. Ethan gritted his teeth, swinging his blade to deflect a clawed strike. Maybe because I didn't wake up this morning planning to star in a gladiator match. You must adapt, Seraphine said, her voice rising above the chaos. Adaptation is your strength, human. Use it. Ethan didn't have time to respond as another rebel lunged at him. This time, he sidestepped smoothly, driving the plasma blade into its chest with a confidence that surprised even him. The creature crumpled, and Ethan took a shaky breath, the adrenaline coursing through him like fire. Adaptation, he muttered under his breath. Got it. The tide of rebels seemed endless. For every one they brought down, two more seemed to take its place. Ethan's muscles burned, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. The plasma blade felt heavier with each swing, but he forced himself to keep moving, keep fighting. Beside him, Seraphine moved like a force of nature, every strike precise, every motion calculated. Yet even she was beginning to show signs of strain. Her movements, though still graceful, were slower than before, and her breathing had grown heavier. The staff's energy flickered faintly, a sign that its power was depleting. "We can't keep this up," Ethan said, slashing at another rebel. "Not like this." Seraphine didn't respond immediately, her focus on the attackers closing in. When she spoke, her voice was tight. "There is another way. But it is risky." Ethan deflected a clawed swipe, stumbling back. "Risky sounds better than dead. What's the plan?" Seraphine hesitated, her golden eyes meeting his. For the first time, there was uncertainty in her gaze. "We must reach the central core of the Nexus. If we overload its energy, it will create a shockwave powerful enough to incapacitate the rebels." Ethan frowned, catching the implication. "Incapacitate them, and us?" "Potentially," Seraphine admitted. "But it is the only way to ensure their defeat." Ethan glanced at the horde of rebels, their numbers overwhelming. His gut twisted at the thought of what Seraphine was proposing, but he knew she was right. They were outnumbered, and the odds weren't in their favor. "All right," he said, gripping the plasma blade tighter. "Lead the way. Let's blow this place up." The journey back to the Nexus was a blur of motion and chaos. The rebels pursued them relentlessly, their roars echoing through the tunnels. Ethan and Seraphine moved as one, their movements synchronized in a way that felt almost instinctive. For every strike Seraphine made, Ethan was there to cover her, and for every rebel Ethan faced, Seraphine was a steady presence at his side. When they finally reached the Nexus, the room was eerily quiet, the shield still faintly shimmering. Seraphine wasted no time, moving to the central console. Her hands flew across the glyphs, the alien symbols responding with a series of sharp, metallic tones. "This will take a moment," she said, her voice calm despite the urgency. "Keep them at bay." Ethan turned to face the tunnel, his chest tightening as the sound of approaching rebels grew louder. "No pressure, huh?" The first rebel burst through the tunnel entrance, and Ethan met it head-on, his blades slicing through the air with practiced precision. He didn't have time to think, only react. Each movement was a blur, driven by instinct and adrenaline. Behind him, Seraphine worked with unwavering focus. The console emitted a low hum as the energy core began to destabilize. The air grew warmer, charged with a crackling tension that made Ethan's skin prickle. "How much longer?" he called, his voice strained. "Nearly there," Seraphine replied, her tone clipped. "Hold them off a little longer." Ethan gritted his teeth, his arms burning with exhaustion. The rebels were relentless, their attacks coming faster and harder. He stumbled, nearly losing his grip on the blade, but a sudden surge of determination pushed him forward. "I hope this plan of yours is worth it," he shouted, dodging a swipe from a rebel's claws. "It is," Seraphine said firmly. "You must trust me." Ethan wanted to argue, to demand more reassurance, but there was no time. The rebels were closing in, and he could feel his strength waning. The console emitted a sharp, piercing tone, and Seraphine straightened. "It is done!" Ethan barely had time to process her words before she grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the center of the room. The air around them crackled with energy, the glow of the Nexus intensifying until it was almost blinding. "Brace yourself," Seraphine said, her voice low. "This will not be pleasant." Before Ethan could respond, the room erupted in a burst of light and sound. The shockwave hit like a freight train, knocking the breath from his lungs. He felt himself falling, the world spinning around him in a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. When the chaos finally subsided, the room was eerily silent. Ethan groaned, his body aching as he pushed himself up on shaky arms. The rebels were gone, their forms lying motionless on the floor. The Nexus was dim, its energy depleted, but it had done its job. Seraphine knelt nearby, her breathing heavy but steady. She met Ethan's gaze, her golden eyes soft with relief. "You survived," she said simply. Ethan managed a weak smile. "Told you I'm adaptable." Serafin's lips curved into a faint smile, and for the first time, Ethan felt a strange sense of connection, a bond forged in fire and chaos. As they sat in the quiet aftermath, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what came next. The rebels were defeated, but their fight was far from over. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: they would face it together.